Hi, welcome to episode 32 of CultureWatch Radio. I'm Andrew Smith, and with me is Bill Muehlenberg. Bill, after an almost 20-year wait, the Taliban have suddenly had an overnight victory in Afghanistan. What is the world coming to?
Yes, Andrew, it's been a very sudden takeover indeed. I mean, we've known for a while now that eventually the Allies should be pulling out, that hopefully the Afghan government and army could maintain control, although many warnings had been given just the last few months. Certainly the intelligence and defense communities, both here in America and elsewhere, have been warning things are going a lot faster than what we expected. And we really got to get our act together. We got to prepare to make sure this transition takes place safely and securely, but that's exactly what has not happened. Just a month ago, U.S. President Biden was assuring us all of Afghanistan would not be taken over by the Taliban. The capital would not fall. We would not see a 1975 Saigon type of, whisking out embassy personnel at the last minute, but that's exactly what is now happening. We're seeing it happen. We still have thousands of Americans, Australians, Afghans who are faithful to our cause, who are desperate to get out, and, they're in airports surrounded by the Taliban, and it's looking terribly grim indeed.
Yeah, for anybody who doesn't believe us, let's take a listen to President Biden from back in July.
Is the Taliban takeover of Afghanistan now inevitable?
No, it is not. Because you have the Afghan troops have 300,000 well-equipped as any army in the world, and an air force against something like 75,000 Taliban. It is not inevitable.
Mr. President, thank you very much. Your own intelligence community has assessed that the Afghan government will likely collapse.
That is not true.
Can you please clarify what they have told you about whether that will happen or not?
That is not true. They did not reach that conclusion.
So what is the level of confidence that they have that it will not collapse?
The Afghan government and leadership has to come together. They clearly have the capacity to sustain the government in place.
And do you see any parallels between this withdrawal and what happened in Vietnam, with some people feeling...
None whatsoever. Zero. What you had entire brigades breaking through the gates of our embassy. 6, if I'm not mistaken. The Taliban is not the North Vietnamese army. They're not remotely comparable in terms of capability. There's going to be no circumstance where you see people being lifted off the roof of a embassy of the United States from Afghanistan. It is not at all comparable. So the question now is, where do they go from here? That the jury is still out. But the likelihood there's going to be the Taliban overrunning everything and owning the whole country is highly unlikely.
And of course, Bill, even the mainstream media are now turning on President Biden.
Yes, well, finally, after the entire time of his term in office being guarded and protected and, smothered over in love and kindness by the mainstream media, now this is such a huge debacle, such an absolute failure, almost unprecedented in U.S. foreign policy, that even, CNN and some of the other pro-Biden giants are now actually asking him hard questions for a change, actually saying, well, maybe we didn't do this very well. Maybe you actually should have listened to some of the information being given to you. So if nothing else, that's one positive, I suppose, out of a very, very dark and negative episode in American history.
Now, those on the ground see an even greater disaster, which initially wasn't being reported through the media. Let's hear from Amir from the Behold Israel Ministry.
So allow me to quote a Chinese editor-in-chief of one of the most important newspapers in China. And when it's important newspapers in China, that means he is basically speaking on behalf of the Chinese government. And he said the following thing: Taiwan, look at what is going in Kabul, because you're next, basically. You're next. In other words, ladies and gentlemen, the post-American world order has officially begun.
Yeah, it changes everything. And Bill, so many, as we saw in the footage of the airport and the big carrier plane leaving, so many were desperate to leave. It's almost as if it were a socialist country. I mean, what's your prognosis for those left behind?
Yes, well, we don't have to speculate on the future. We have both the past, what's already happened under Taliban rule, who are, as we know, fully committed to Sharia law, but we know what's happening right now. We hear reports, people being dragged off buses if they have on their smartphone a Bible app indicating they might be a Christian. They're being pulled away, killed. Taliban are going door to door as we speak, looking for any enemies of the regime. I mean, this is, well, just like communist nations. They are on a search and destroy mission. Christians will obviously be at the forefront of their campaign. Anybody who is faithful to America, whether interpreters and their families, anybody who provided any help to the Allies, they will be targeted. And of course, with Sharia law, well, women and children are once again, at the coalface of persecution, being treated as second-class citizens. They had, for the past decade or so, been given some freedom under the Allies, a bit of education, being able to have jobs, not being covered head to foot. But all that will change in an instant. Women, once again, will be forced to stay at home, not work, not go to school. They can only go out if they're accompanied by their husband and fully covered. So already we're seeing what life will be like in the new Afghanistan. And that quote you gave about China, well, that's even more of a worry. This is not just a failure in America and for Australia and the other allies who were there. It's not just a failure for Afghanistan itself. China is absolutely delighted in what's happened there. They see this utterly weak and enfeebled American president. They knew where Trump stood on these things. The Taliban knew where Trump stood, but with Biden in the White House, and now, of course, he's on vacation at Camp David anyway, China knows, hey, it'll be a walk in the park to now finally take over Taiwan. Joe Biden won't do a thing. He won't lift a finger to protect the Taiwanese. Right now, Taiwan better start looking at getting some nuclear weapons fast. This whole thing is an international debacle. We're living in some of the most precarious times of recent geopolitical history. And it's all because, well, we've had an absolutely hopeless president, a leader of the free world. Instead of training our army, our military to be strong in Afghanistan over the recent months, Biden was pushing LGBTI rights. Yeah, as if that's going to go down well in a Muslim majority country. And in the Pentagon, the U.S. military, the whole thing is on wokeness and PC. They're concerned about we don't offend anybody by the wrong personal pronouns. So that's going to really shake up the Taliban. That's going to scare China to not do anything. This is a disaster in the making, and the days ahead look very grim indeed.
Well, I guess we could always count on the feminists to stand up and say something for the sake of their sisters in Afghanistan.
Yes, well, we wish. Crickets chirping, right? It's been, one of the ironies that, the whole feminist movement, so concerned, and rightly, about the oppression of women in the West. Well, there are cases, yes, in the West of this happening, but nothing compared to what happens in Muslim-majority countries. Women are second-class citizens at best, and they certainly will be again in Afghanistan. And yet we hear nothing from Western feminists about the horrible position women and children, again, now find themselves in places like Afghanistan. This double standard, this hypocrisy. calling out so-called oppression, some real, some not, in the West, while staying absolutely silent about genuine oppression of women in these kind of countries. It just makes a mockery of much of modern feminism.
Well, maybe the truth of the story there is that they only try when they think people are going to listen, whereas you can predict the response that the Taliban would give them, and they say, and so they know not to even bother.
Well, that's part of it, certainly. But the other problem is it's the whole issue of the radical left in the West tends to hate the West just as much as Islam does. So they become strange bedfellows, right? Liberals in the West side with groups like Islam as they hate on the West, hate on America especially. But of course, the problem is as soon as Islam comes to power in a region, the first one to get their heads lopped off are these gullible Western lefties and the feminists as well. So they may be odd bedfellows indeed right now, but that arrangement will not long last if and when Islam comes to power. So all in all, it's a disaster, and things will be getting worse in the days ahead.
As they say, useful idiots. And don't forget, there's always more at the Culture Watch website. And we'll see you again next week with another episode of Culture Watch Radio. Subscribe where you listen at SoundCloud, YouTube, and Rumble so you don't miss a thing.